All right, so with that, we transition over to the college basketball side of things here. And, look, I mean, doing so much with the bowl games here throughout the month of December, we've got a lot of catching up to do on the college basketball side with our listeners. And, obviously after next week's show, once we get to January 20th, it'll be all college basketball for us here on this segment. So we'll have plenty of time to get you caught up on our Handicapping the Hardwood segments. But, yeah, we've been trying to do as much as we can here with college hoops. Conference play now going for everybody. We've got regression candidates. We've got fade and follow teams. We've got some strength of schedule discrepancies, stuff like that. We'll hit on all those types of things here over the next several weeks, looking ahead to conference tournaments and, of course, then March Madness and the other postseason tournaments, which generally have more value than the NCAA tournament itself. But we start here with some regression candidates, and we start in the SEC with the Arkansas Razorbacks.
Yeah, Arkansas, I think you have to say that they've been better than expected so far this year. They're 12-1. Musselman's a really good coach. They're only giving up 22.3% on three-pointers, which really is hard to fathom 13 games into the year. They have clearly played some weaker offenses, not the worst schedule ever, but not a great schedule. I think this team will be good at defending three-point shot. I don't think they're ever going to be able to keep 22% going. So if you look at the second best team in that, it's 24.9% from three-point range. So, I mean, you're talking a pretty big gap here for there being 353 teams. This is going to regress. The other thing is Arkansas is really pushing the pace here. You're going to have some low numbers with Arkansas games based on the fact that their defense has been so good so far this year. But a team that's playing as fast as them, doing quite a bit of full court pressure, I would definitely lean toward Arkansas overs coming up. I think there's going to be some pretty low numbers that maybe you could take advantage of. Also, would probably lean going against Arkansas just based on the fact that I imagine that will regress a decent amount on defense.
Well, and you mentioned teams that, are allegedly doing very well defensively from the three-point line. It may just be that maybe they've played teams that can't shoot the basketball particularly well. West Virginia tonight is that team that's second in the country, allowing 24.9% from three. Wrote up a preview over at BangTheBook.com for tonight's West Virginia and Oklahoma State game. Oklahoma State maybe not the team to take full advantage of that. But you can be damn well sure that some teams in the Big 12 will.
Yeah, I would say Oklahoma State, not really the team that you would expect to take advantage of that the most. Definitely teams in the Big 12 will, though. And I think the Big 12 is going to be a really good conference this year. A lot of depth in that conference. It's a fun conference where, you don't have any free wins. So I think that'll be a good one for us to talk about throughout the course of the season. Some of the teams that have actually been up there pretty high in the standings in the past aren't quite as good as they have been, I think, specifically of a Kansas State. But even them, it's not like it's a free win. So there's a lot of good teams in the Big 12. West Virginia has been a lot better than most people would have thought so far this year. And they have played a tough schedule. So Huggins is just doing a good job with this group. They nearly won there at Kansas the other day. They really had a chance. I wonder how they'll play with a quick turnaround going to Oklahoma State right away. I think this is a pretty good test for them because, like I said, they really did have a chance to beat Kansas in that game. So can they come back with a good effort only 2 days later?
Especially with an Oklahoma State team that got beat by 35 against Texas Tech over the weekend. So, Oklahoma State, certainly plenty of incentive for them to bounce back. Like I said, that preview over at BangTheBook.com. And by the way, money coming in pretty heavily on Oklahoma State tonight. That line down from 2 to as low as pick'em out there in the marketplace. But back to the regression candidates here. I don't know what's up with you, man, but another week, another Ivy League mention here.
Yeah, it's true. Maybe I should stop talking about the Ivy League and maybe my results will get better. Now, I'm obviously that doesn't have anything to do with it, but Dartmouth opponents are shooting 58.5% from the free throw line. They've played 15 games, and opponents are shooting 58.5% from the free throw line. It's unbelievable. I mean, that one really stunned me. And the fact that you could have played that many teams and they're shooting that percentage, obviously very lucky. I think overs could have some value in Dartmouth games coming up. They're going to have some really low totals. It's evident, though, that Dartmouth has sped up in their recent games. And these are things that I have had success in the past looking for is recent tempo changes. And let's see if they keep that going in the Ivy League, or if there are quite a few teams in the Ivy League that play slowly. So I don't know if Dartmouth will continue their pace of play, getting quicker as it has recently, or if they'll just kind of go back into that stall ball. But I do think that Dartmouth overs could have some value. You're going to get some numbers in the 120s or low 130s with Dartmouth, and somebody's going to start making some free throws against this team at some point.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent one. And in particular, too, you talk about that back-to-back that you get in the Ivy League where, maybe you may not have the legs on the defensive end. And by the way, not only the 58.5% that opponents are shooting, they are 329th in the country themselves at 63.2% at the free throw line. So any sort of positive regression with those free points there, definitely something you want to keep an eye on for Dartmouth. And something else, just to give our listeners a really good resource, over at barttorvik.com. And again, we talk all the time about Bart Torvik. We sing the praises of that website on every single show here. He's got charts where you can sort of see the trend lines of these teams. When you go to the specific team pages, one of them is pace. So you can see if a team has made a pace change. This is also really beneficial if you talk about injury situations where maybe a big man goes out and you wonder, okay, how is this team going to adjust? Well, if you don't have to worry about your 7-footer running the floor anymore, maybe they play faster with a small ball lineup, something like that. You can see that over at Torvik's website on those team pages. Really, really good resource for everybody out there.
I think that's my single favorite thing on that site, and it is a very good site. I think being able to see that, the trend line is very helpful. I mean, and you can see where there's maybe an aberration, and then where there becomes, hey, this looks like it's really a true trend. It's something to keep in mind. You can do that with pace. You can do that with a lot of other things, rebounding, different things like that. It's definitely something to keep an eye on, and it's something where you can get an edge on those recent games. Like I actually try to be pretty heavily looking at recency, because things change in college basketball. Teams don't stay the same from game 1 to game 30 something. These teams are going to be different. Like you said, there's going to be injuries. Some teams, they're just not very good at playing really fast, so they decide, let's slow it down, or maybe they're not having any success slowing it down, so they try to speed up. Look for those kind of changes. It's certainly very helpful.
And I think that's another thing too. We talk about, again, New Year's betting resolutions going into 2020. Because of my sabermetrics background in baseball, I'm a sample size guy. I need big sample sizes of statistics. Well, in a lot of these sports, and maybe the Titans are a perfect example of this, where if you look at their full body of work, it's not as impressive as their recent body of work, because you've got the 5 Marcus Mariota or the 6 Marcus Mariota starts early on in the year. When Tannehill took over, their offense was dramatically different. And that's something that I have a really hard time adjusting to, because it's just not my philosophy. But in college basketball, in the NBA, in the NHL, some of those recent developments do carry a lot more weight. So that's something I need to do a better job of here this year. And, having resources like this can definitely be a big help. But I think that's something that maybe a lot of people end up struggling with is, this team has X for yards per play over the course of the season. Yeah, but you've got to really break that down and see if the offense sucks now and was really good in the non-conference or something like that. That stuff's really, really important. And sometimes I feel like there aren't enough hours in the day for me to follow it. But if I want my handicapping to improve, that's something I do feel like I need to prioritize.
Yeah, I think that, sample size is still really important in baseball. And like you said, the other sports are a little bit different. You look at college basketball, if you're playing a certain way for 12 games and you just totally decide to change your style of play, nothing's the same as what it was before. And now for 3 games, you've played totally differently. Those first 12 games mean nothing. It doesn't matter anymore. So, as bettors, that's something to keep in mind. If you see some big change, if you read from a beat writer that they've decided they're going to start playing a zone defense instead of man-to-man, or they're going to press when they haven't been pressing, those first games where they didn't do that don't make any difference anymore. So I think that's certainly a good point.
All right, I want to take a look here. I don't know if I would call them regression candidates, but I've got a question for you here, Kyle. What do these teams have in common? St. John's, Washington, Tennessee, Vanderbilt, Texas A&M, Bowling Green, USF, Arizona, Wichita State, Fordham, Stanford, and Texas Tech. What do those 12 teams have in common?
Wow, I don't know. You threw me off when you put Fordham in the middle of it. I don't know. I mean, I assume that's something about good defense and bad offense. I don't know what it is.
All 12 of those teams have played one true road game so far this season. And this is an angle I played. I took Marquette over the weekend against Villanova. Villanova had only played realistically one true road game. It was at Ohio State. They got beat by 25. Their other true road game was against St. Joseph's, part of the Big Five where they play all those Philadelphia teams. So they didn't even have to leave their home city. That Marquette game was, to me, their second true road game of the season. 0.83 points per possession, second lowest output of the year. Their lowest output of the year, the game at Ohio State, second game of the year, 0.797 points per possession. So this is something you want to absolutely take a look at here in conference play. These teams that haven't played a lot of true road games, those 12 once again, St. John's, Washington, Tennessee, Vanderbilt, A&M, Bowling Green, USF, Arizona, Wichita State, who we'll talk about here in a couple of minutes, Fordham, Stanford, and Texas Tech. That's an important thing here at this time of the year, especially because home court advantages go back to normal now that winter break is mostly over.
Yeah, and I'm going to single out the one team that really stood out to me when you said that is Fordham. They've played the 352nd strength of schedule, so only one team has played a weaker schedule than them. They're 6-8 so far this year, but they're a lot worse than that. And they're about to play 2 road games here at St. Bonnie and then Duquesne. I think Fordham could be a good fade coming up. So it's almost like I'll add one to the follow fade section here, and I think Fordham could be a good fade. So you kind of brought up a team that I think really does stand out.
I was trying to count them as you were talking there. There were just too many, but I believe there are about 30 teams that have only played 2 true road games so far. And we're talking about Florida, who plays at South Carolina Tuesday night. We'll talk about that game in a few minutes. Louisville, Penn State, Ohio State. They're on the road at Maryland and at Indiana here coming up, and they're not playing particularly well right now. Auburn, how about Hawaii? Only 2 true road games for Hawaii. So when they get into conference play here in the Big West, they come to the mainland. That could be difficult for them. Michigan State, Kansas, LSU. You've got some really big names here that just haven't played a lot of true road games. Now, maybe they've played neutral site tournaments and stuff like that, so they have played away from home, but a true road game and a neutral site are a hell of a lot different.
Yeah, they're very different, and Hawaii is one that certainly stands out as a team that they've usually struggled coming to the mainland. And really, they have played all home games. It's not been neutral site games. They played the road game at Illinois, the road game at Oregon.
And they
didn't fare well.
Both of them.
Right. They didn't fare well at all in those games. And I wouldn't expect them to be covering numbers very consistently on the road here. So definitely would lean against Hawaii. And I think that's a really good point that you made, that being this deep into the season, some of the teams, playing like 15 games, 14 games. And if you've only played 1 or 2 as a true road game, and now you're going to go into an environment that's a very difficult one in conference play where home court advantage does mean more than what it has here in the past few weeks, I think that's a great point.
And again, I mean, these aren't just blind plays by any means, but,
right.
For example, take a look at a team like Santa Clara, right? They've played 2 true road games. They're out there in the West Coast Conference. They are 327th in effective field goal percentage on offense, 330th in effective field goal percentage on defense. They are 341st in the country at 20% shooting threes. Is that going to get better when they go play on the road in a setting that they're not accustomed to? Highly unlikely. So you can go through, sort this again over on Torvik's website on the team stats page, sort by venue away. Again, it's not an automatic play, but if you've got a team that's really good offensively and they haven't played away from home, they're probably going to struggle. If you've got a team that's really bad offensively, it's probably not going to get better on the road. So again, starting points to where you get something that looks like an angle you can take advantage of, and then you deep dive into the handicap from there.
I agree. I think that, just blindly going against teams that are in that situation is not really the way to go. First of all, there'd be a lot of bets. Do you really want to take that many? Second of all, all these things are not equal. Some of these teams have veterans who have gone on the road many times in the past and have proven that they can win on the road. Some of these other teams haven't. So, individually handicap these games, certainly.
All right, so with that, we take a look at some fade and follow teams here. And once again, man, maybe you have a fever or something, but another Ivy League mention.
I know. Yeah. I mean, I feel fine. I don't know. It's very strange. Ivy League is not something that I bet very much. And I will say, I think that our Ivy League chatter is going to back down pretty quickly, because we're about to go into the Ivy League season where they play Friday, Saturday. I think those are tough games to bet. I will say, I think Yale at this point could be a good fade. I like Yale. I think Yale's a good team, a well-coached team, but they're 12-2 ATS. Extreme success there in the non-conference. I think their prices are going to be a bit too high now. I don't see this Yale team as one that's just going to blow everybody out in the Ivy League. And they're going to be laying double digits here pretty often in the Ivy League. There's some weak teams here, certainly with, Brown and Columbia and Cornell. I just don't think that Yale is going to consistently blow out those teams in these strange spots. So I think that taking the double-digit points going against Yale could make some sense for a while.
All right, so obviously we have to look at the opposite side of the spectrum here with a follow team, and this one's from a bigger conference.
Yeah, I think Iowa State, I know that we have talked about this in the past, and I remember you and Brad Powers talking about this in college football, that, these teams who lose to somebody that's, just terrible, a Division II team, or somebody that's a no-name team. Iowa State lost to Florida A&M, and they lost to them at home, which, that's hard to imagine. They've got a great home court advantage. And yes, I know Tyrese Halliburton didn't play in that game, but I don't think that really matters. It's hard for me to imagine that they lost that game at home to Florida A&M. But you remember that we talked about a few weeks ago, there's going to be some huge upsets that nobody ever expects because the home court advantage is just not there. This was a great example of that. So that was something that, we hit the nail on the head on that one. But Iowa State is a team to me that they come off that loss, then they lose in overtime to TCU. Not a bad performance there in that game. Now Iowa State has got to be rated pretty lowly, and I would imagine that the public would not be wanting to bet them. I think Iowa State is probably going to have some value, especially in some of their home games coming up, because they do have a really good home court advantage. To me, I think Iowa State could be a good team to back.
Yeah, I think that one makes some sense here. And Iowa State winds up playing Kansas here this week. Kansas, one of those teams, only 2 true road games. They lost at Louisville by a point, then beat Stanford, played very well defensively against Stanford with an 8-day layoff, though, to go cross country. But now they get that away game at Hilton Coliseum, which we know the Big 12, big home road dichotomy in that conference year in and year out. So Iowa State probably will pick off somebody at home here, and will probably do so in pretty short order. So we'll continue applying some of these concepts here and break down a slew of games to finish out the show. And one that I wanted to talk about specifically here on Tuesday night, Florida and South Carolina, is a very interesting game to me. We've talked a lot about how Florida has been a very big disappointment so far this season. They just needed double overtime at home to beat Alabama over the weekend. They lost to Utah State, got beat handily by Butler. Losses also to UConn and Florida State. South Carolina, they beat Virginia on December 20th. They beat Virginia. They scored 70 points against Virginia. Then lost at home to Stetson. Now they open conference play against Florida. These are tricky handicaps. I think this is something that's maybe tripped you up a little bit here during the college basketball season, is that there seems like on a team-by-team basis, there are just wild swings. You'll get a good performance, and then you'll get whatever we want to call this South Carolina thing against Stetson.
Yeah, I mean, everything's been tripping me up here lately, no doubt about that. And, I'm always honest about how I've been doing. And obviously the haters have had a field day here with me lately. And I'm pretty sure that things will improve. And, over the long term, I've done really well. But I do think there's been some really strange things going on in college basketball. And the rule change is always a difficult thing because you don't know exactly how that'll work. But I think Florida, a team that, if you look at that trends thing on Bart Torvik for pace, you're going to see that Florida has played way faster in their last 2 games. I mean, just way, way faster. Now, it's been against Long Beach State and Alabama, So is this something that's changing from Florida, or is this something that they just decided to play what style their opponent was playing? I do think it's really interesting that in their game against Alabama, according to Ken Palm, they were only using 15.6 seconds of the shot clock on average, and that's 2 seconds less than what they have for the year overall. So either Florida decided, let's just go ahead and play Alabama style, or Florida wants to play quicker. South Carolina likes to play fast as well. They're just not very good at offense, and they're really efficient on defense. I think that I would lean over in this game. I think that if both teams continue to play quickly, as they have been recently, you're going to get a pretty low total in this game. Florida is certainly more talented than South Carolina. There's no doubt about that. Florida is a team that, though, I can't bet them, especially as a favorite here. They're definitely going to be favored in this game. I don't know what I'm going to get from Florida. I think Florida has a high upside, but not consistent. I want to see something out of them before I want to bet them on the side.
Well, and something else to consider here, now that we're in the conference play, we're going to have a lot of lines in the fouling range. South Carolina, 345th in the country at the free throw line, 60.3%. They also can't make a three to save their lives. So keep that in mind here, too. As you mentioned, Florida going to be the favorite here in this game. But if you've got teams that can't make their free throws and they're in that, 5 to 7, 5 to 8 point range, even 4 to 8, I guess I would say, those are dicey situations for some of those teams that really can't do much at the free throw line. A game that you mentioned here, we kind of got a little bit of a, not a 50-50 split per se, but you and I both kind of looking at some different games here this week. Utah State and Air Force is one on Tuesday night that kind of caught your eye.
Yeah, Utah State had this huge game at home against San Diego State on Saturday night, and that game was really built up. I think that was a tremendous performance from San Diego State. I had the under in that game, and I was really surprised that San Diego State's offense looked that good. Utah State's a good defensive team. San Diego State a really good defensive team, but the offenses worked a little bit better than I thought they would in that game. Utah State really had put a lot into that game. They had just lost 70-53 to UNLV, a really disappointing showing. They come home. Utah State was favored in that game against San Diego State, I'm pretty sure. And, that's one of those spots where maybe people got a little bit too cute and just thought, okay, we got to go against San Diego State. The odds makers know what they're doing here. Like I said, I lost on the under, so it's not like I did anything right in that game either. But I think that based on their body of work, San Diego State has shown that they're better than Utah State. So it was one of those spots where I think that people might have got a little bit ahead of themselves on the side. I do think that Utah State here in this one is the better team than Air Force. But I think this is a really tough spot. Are they going to try to bounce back after that loss? It's a quick turnaround, a pretty quick turnaround at least. Air Force is a good enough team to where they can beat somebody at home, and they will pick off somebody who's pretty good. Air Force is better than they've been in recent seasons. They've been very efficient on offense. They're third in effective field goal percentage offense, according to Ken Palm. I wouldn't want to bet Utah State in this game. I would probably lean either over or Air Force in this game. But I think it's an interesting game where we're going to learn a lot about Utah State. Is Utah State going to take a step back this season, or are they going to be for real again? They had a really nice season last year, but this is the type of game that they need to bounce back and win here. And let's see how they look in this one.
I'll be real interested to see this too, because Utah State, they really haven't been as good defensively as they were last year. I know they've still been okay. Giving up the 77 to San Diego State, not a great look. Air Force, second in the country in three-point percentage, and they are atrocious in just about every category on defense. So this thing could be a shootout, maybe, if Air Force is making their shots. The thing for Utah State is this. At this point in time, I don't think there's any chance that they get an at-large berth. They've got one game left against a top 10 opponent. That's the rematch against San Diego State on the road. They've already lost to St. Mary's, lost to BYU, did beat Florida and LSU, so maybe there's a chance, but their margin for error is very, very slim now. And you wonder about that with some of these teams that maybe they use this time to kind of figure things out and try to roll into March and win the conference tournament. Now, maybe that doesn't resonate down to the players. The coach has to be thinking it now at this point in time. But that's always something I kind of look at here with these top teams in the conference is that I don't think they're an auto bid team now. I don't think they're an at-large bid team now. They probably have to win this conference, which means you take these games in January to figure out what the hell you're doing wrong And sometimes you may get tripped up if that's what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that they would have to have a really impressive record at this point to get in the tournament without, beating somebody like San Diego State on the road. Like you said, there's not really a bunch of top teams that play here in this conference. The Mountain West is certainly weaker than it was a few years ago. So Utah State is going to have a good record. I imagine that. They're going to win 20-some games here, but that might not mean as much this year as it did in past seasons. So let's see how Utah State looks here. I would lean toward the over. I would also lean Air Force. This is one of those games where I could see quite a bit of different outcomes possibly happening. So, if you bet Air Force, I think you probably want to bet something on the money line, at least some, because there's certainly a chance they pull the upset here.
All right, so let's go to a couple of SoCon games here on Wednesday. One of these we matched up on when we were kind of comparing notes before the show. One of them we didn't, and we'll start with the one that you pointed out here, Western Carolina and VMI. Western Carolina, not a team a whole lot of people are going to know. They've lost 3 games on this season. Georgia, Florida State by 5 on the road, and they were pretty competitive against Xavier on the road as well. They've won all their games otherwise, albeit against a pretty weak schedule. What stands out about this game to you?
Well, here's my premium look ahead for listeners. I'm almost sure I'll play the over in this game. Western Carolina has really impressed me on offense. I think Mark Prosser is doing a really good job with this team. This is a Western Carolina team that a couple years ago didn't have anything going right for them. I mean, they were 13-19. Last year, they go 7-25. And here they are 10-3. Now, clearly they haven't played a very good schedule, and they're not as good as their record looks at this point. But this is a much improved team. And even last year, you could see that their offense was getting quite a bit better. It was just defense that was a problem. And now this year, they've decided to play a lot quicker, about 3 possessions per game more than what they had last year. They're still weak on defense. I think they'll look even worse on defense in this conference, because if you look at their strength of schedule so far this year, they've played a lot of really weak offenses so far this year. VMI, the one that really stands out to me, is that this is one of those recency things. They have clearly played much quicker in their last few games. This was a team that I was as I was going down looking for recency changes, VMI really stood out to me. So I wanted to point this one out, and it kind of works out pretty well because we kind of talked about that that's something that you should really look for. I think this total is going to be too low here. I think this is a game that there's a lot of scoring here. VMI slowed the game down a little bit earlier this year. It didn't work. They weren't winning anyways, so now they go back to what they did before and play a little faster. They're very weak on defense. Both of these teams can shoot it pretty well, especially from 3-point range. I think this is a high-scoring game.
Yeah, VMI, second in the country in 3-point rate, 51.5%, and they're 41st in making them at almost 37%. So definitely the chance here for a very, very high-scoring game in the SoCon. But the game of the night in the SoCon, East Tennessee State and UNC Greensboro, both of us isolating this game. We love to talk about some under-the-radar types of matchups. I don't know if I'd even call this one under the radar, because these two teams have kind of gotten a little bit of national run over the last few years, but this is a great one in the SoCon.
Yeah, and the SoCon is really good. I mean, I don't know how many people realize how good the SoCon is at this point. So it's fun to talk about this conference. They got some good teams at the top of the conference. Certainly, there's some weak teams lower down there with VMI and Citadel and teams like that. But, I think the top of the SoCon is very good. East Tennessee State is a really well-coached team. I really like Steve Forbes. Think he's a very good coach. Consistently, they've been a very good team. UNC Greensboro, Wes Miller's done a great job with this team. Both of these teams are consistently good. They've really raised their program over the last few years. These two teams really have good games when they play each other. And I would imagine the same thing will happen again here. I think this one's even more interesting because UNC Greensboro coming off a double overtime loss to Wofford. What do they do after that loss? Well, East Tennessee State is coming off a loss to Furman. And the game before that, they beat Wofford by 1 point, 49-48. The tempo will be really slow in this one. I would lean to the under. I would kind of hope that this would be 130 or higher. We might get a 128 or 128.5. And I don't know if I'd play the under at that price, but I do think that Greensboro is probably, the team who has been more consistently good in the last, several games. They had this lost to Wofford. I think Wofford's just a good team again this year. But the fact that Greensboro was able to go on the road and beat Vermont told me quite a bit about this team. Greensboro is going to be favored here. I imagine this will be a very tight game. I'm not sure if I'm going to bet this one, but, honestly, Wednesday night, I think this is the best game.
And I think it's interesting, too, and I did kind of touch on both of these teams in my Situational Spots article over at BangTheBook.com, because you've got Greensboro playing Wofford, East Tennessee State, and then Furman on the road on Saturday after that game against ETSU. So that's a little bit of a tough spot. Meanwhile, ETSU, Wofford, Furman on the road, Greensboro on the road, then home games in a big favorite role against VMI and Samford. There could be some situational spots in the SoCon here because you get up to play these teams that are kind of on your level in this conference, and then you play teams that are really bad, and you're a really big favorite in that role. Could be a good conference to isolate some situational spots as we go along here.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Let's look back at what East Tennessee State did last year as a good example. East Tennessee State goes to play Wofford, loses in overtime, loses to Furman on the road, and then they come home as a big favorite and barely beat Citadel. A tough spot there. And then earlier in the year, they beat Mercer on the road in overtime. And the next game, they were a huge favorite against VMI and only won by 3 points. So certainly, I think that's a great point.
All right, so let's take a look here at Thursday night real quick. And, as I mentioned, Wichita State, one of those 12 teams that's only played one road game, but they're at home here, hosting Memphis. Big game in the AAC coming up here on Thursday night. Any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I like Wichita State as a team, very good defensive team, 15th in the nation in defensive efficiency so far this year. Wichita State hasn't played a very good schedule, though. 256 strength of schedule, according to Ken Palm. Memphis, though, 262nd. I think Memphis is probably a bit overvalued by some people at this point. People like to, root for Memphis. Penny Hardaway is their coach. They certainly recruit well. I think that the jury is still a bit out as far as whether Memphis is a really good team or not. They had that nice win on the road against Tennessee, but Tennessee has not been very good at all lately. So I don't know how much that means. Memphis coming off the loss to Georgia makes this an interesting spot too. I would lean Wichita State in this game. I think Wichita State, when they go on the road, you might have some good chances to go against them. But if I were taking a side here, I would lean toward Wichita State.
Yeah, again, I think this one's so interesting. And again, I mentioned my situational article. You get up for this big game against Memphis on Thursday night. Then you go on the road to UConn Sunday. That may be a really tough spot for Wichita State there. Again, would be only their second true road game. Their other true road game at Oklahoma State. So really not that far away. UConn and Temple with a little bit of a roadie here Sunday and then Wednesday of next week. So we'll see what happens to Wichita State here in this one. If they win this game convincingly, maybe a good opportunity to go against them on Sunday in that game against UConn. One more game to hit on real quickly here as we go all the way ahead to Saturday. Ohio State and Indiana. The Buckeyes playing at Maryland on Tuesday night, at Indiana on Saturday. Tough little stretch here for a Buckeyes team, missing a key piece in Kyle Young and really not playing as well as they did earlier on in the year.
Yeah, I think Ohio State got a bit overvalued after their early success. And if you look back now, Cincinnati is not very good. Cincinnati just lost to Tulane. Cincinnati, they have some chemistry problems. Something's wrong with that Bearcats team, certainly. UNC win also is not as impressive for Ohio State because North Carolina has not been very good. So I think Ohio State may have been overvalued because they beat some teams who we thought were better than what they are. Obviously, their win against Villanova was really impressive. I think Ohio State's a good team. I don't think that, they're a top 3 or 4 team as they were rated there for a while. I think they're probably still a bit overvalued by some people. I see Ken Palm has them at 4th. I don't think this Buckeyes team is a top 4 team. I'm clearly a big Buckeyes fan, and I hope I'm wrong, but I think Ohio State has too many weaknesses. Their big weakness that really stands out if you watch enough of their games, they really struggle with turnovers. They can't keep turning it over this often and beating good teams. Indiana, to me, would be the side I would take in this game if I were taking a side. Indiana's going to be getting points here. Let's see how they play in the game before that. I would hope that Indiana doesn't look too great against Northwestern. and maybe Ohio State has a good performance against Maryland. If so, maybe we get 5 points or something like that on Indiana. I think this is a really close game. I don't think Ohio State's going to blow out Indiana. I think this Indiana team is quite a bit improved. Obviously, they've been a bit inconsistent as well. They had that bad loss at home to Arkansas. Then they lost to Maryland on the road. Indiana 11-3. They've kind of stumbled here a bit of late, but same thing for Ohio State. So both of these teams have kind of looked really good and then struggled here of late. I think I would grab the points with Indiana if I were taking a side here.
A lot of games and a lot of opportunities here this week in college basketball, to say the least. Kyle Hunter, you can find his work over at huntersportspicks.com. And, again, like we said, I mean, it's been little bit of a struggle of late, but long term, you've been very, very strong in this business, and I'm certainly looking forward to you bouncing back.
Yeah, I appreciate that. One of the things is I like to talk about it sometimes when I do poorly, because I want people to know that, when I say something, you can tell that, I'm telling you the truth. I'm not going to be one of these guys that's going to just tell you only when I'm doing well. I'm going to be honest both ways. And, like I said, I've been really frustrated with how things have gone of late. But if you look at the long run, I've been very good, in all sports and specifically in college basketball. If you go back to 2010, I'm up 186 units just overall. So, certainly the long run has been good. I hate it for the people who bought in recently that have gotten the bad stretch. But, I'll be giving out more free information. You can sign up for the free picks newsletter at huntersportspicks.com. or the free area over at bettersportspicks.com as well. So plenty of free information coming, and I would imagine that things will turn around.
Well, and of course, as always, make sure you follow Kyle on Twitter at Kyle Hunter Picks. Kyle Hunter, huntersportspicks.com and bettersportspicks.com, the two sites. Appreciate your time as always, man. Thank you so much for joining me, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Thanks. Take care.